The Steam-Man of the West, Book 2, The Road Home, by Joseph A. Leveche, Chapter 1. Aurora, Nevada was dying. As the blood rushed from its head, it slipped into a coma. The groundwater was poisoned from uranium. The gold and silver mines were empty, and the lumber mills were closing. At the Cheney farm outside town, the young inventor, Frank Root, Jr., and his companions prepared their departure. Like white blood cells, they had cured as much of the town's ills as they could. The source of the poison was removed and a criminal threat eliminated, but the damage was done. All that was left was the voyage home to Kansas. In search of his father, Frank and his cousin Charlie Bull recently arrived in Aurora, thanks to his invention, the Steam Man. During the trip in their large man-shaped steam engine, they had acquired a legion of friends, including Denver Doll, also known as the Detective Queen, artistic photographer Edward Mudbridge, the masked writer Bessie Little, the orphan P.S., and Solomon the Cat. Currently, they awaited the return of Charlie and P.S., who rode Frank's newest invention, the Electric Man, for one last visit to nearby Mono Lake. Charlie wanted some more time in the area's hot springs. The 70-square-mile saline solar lake formed part of an endoheric basin, meaning it lacked an ocean outlet. Its alkaline state made it unsafe for swimming. It had and continues to have an unusual ecosystem. During the summer, trillions of brine shrimp inhabit it. The crustaceans attract 2 million migratory birds. Many local inhabitants, however, were repulsed, not only by the copious droppings, but also by weird sightings. Sprites were said to haunt a volcanic island. A large fog perpetually hung over an eastern section of the lake. Recently, people reported seeing an unknown giant sea beast. Without warning, the Electric Man rushed into the Cheney farm, dust flying behind it. Charlie skid to a stop next to the Steam Man. "You won't believe what we saw," said P.S. "The Mono Lake monster, it's real." We were standing on the shoreline and there was a ripple in the water. The first time Charlie tricked me when he threw a rock into it, but this was it. Part of it came right out of the water. It had a long neck, a big snout with jagged teeth. It looked right at me. Even Solomon was scared. "Meow," said the cat. "Well, Frank," said Denver Doll. "Maybe we don't have to go home right away," said the inventor. "Slow down and tell me everything from the beginning," Frank said. "It's like P.S. said. We were on the eastern bank of Mono Lake. We heard a big commotion in the water. All of a sudden, this giant neck pops up swaying from side to side. It was like a tree branch in the wind. It had a giant head and dead eyes. It shifted around for a few seconds, then flipped backwards into the water. It didn't make any noise except for some squelching. I thought it was brown trousers time," said Charlie. "Oh, I want to get a photograph," said Edward. "What do you think, Father?" He had recently reunited with Frank Root, Sr. after catching him in the disguise of Spring-Heeled Jack, a villain who terrorized Aurora. "I think I'm going on ahead. If one of you could give me a ride to the nearest train station. I've been away from home too long, and I miss your mother. Otherwise, I would go with you." "I'll take him to the station," said Charlie. "I'm not in a hurry to see that horror again." "All right," Frank said. "I have to admit my scientific curiosity is piqued. If Charlie will take the Electric Man and deliver Father, the rest of us will travel to the lake. If no one has any objections, we will meet here later." Denver Doll was thoughtful. "This here's some kinds of humbug, and that's my funeral." "You didn't see it," said P.S. "It was living." They arrived at the lake, and the boys showed him where they spied the beast. The water was calm. Occasionally, the sun glinted off concentrations of brine shrimp. It looked like neurons firing in a brain. A few times, P.S. said he saw disturbances in the water. Frank circumvented the entire lake with nothing to show for it. He said they should return to the farm. "Are you giving up?" asked the orphan. "No," said Frank, "but I have an idea." Charlie was already there when they arrived. He made good time in the Electric Man. To build it, Frank collaborated with Scottish physicist James Clerk Maxwell, discoverer of the electromagnetic spectrum. "I had to go all the way to Truckee so he could catch the Central Pacific Railroad," Charlie said. That's a 60-mile round trip, Frank. I say this with all sincerity. Your machines have launched the age of fast travel. A man could go around the world in 100 days. Or less, said Frank. We had to go through the Donner Pass, which didn't please me much. Then I had to go back through it alone, said Charlie, shivering. In 1846, a group of settlers from Illinois, on their way to Sutter's Fort, California, attempted a shortcut near the Truckee River. They were caught in a massive early blizzard and resorted to cannibalism to survive. They say you can still hear the ghost cries of the travelers who didn't make it. Stop it, said Frank. The crew spent several days in the barn, which the inventor turned into a makeshift workshop. Then they set out again to the lake. The electric man pulled a flatbed wagon on which a large shape was tarp covered. They backed the cart into the lake to unload the cargo. With his usual flourish, Frank removed the tarp. The object underneath bobbed on the water, and the electric man pulled the now cleared cart back onto the ground. The boat was a long gray cylinder with tapered ends and big enough to carry the entire crew. It had a series of round, transparent rubber windows built into the sides, above and below the waterline. On top was a vertical tube with a white, watertight hatch. Electric lights were positioned all around it. Under the waterline, a propeller was attached to the rear. The entire system was made of Frank's revolutionary material, cellulose, and a layer of transparent rubber to reduce the burning effects of the water. P.S. wanted the entire vessel made from transparent rubber, invented by Charles Goodyear before his death. Both Frank and Edward thought it was an excellent idea, but not one they had time to implement. The first practical submarine was built in 1863 by Horace Lawrence Huntley for the Confederate States. But instead of hand-crank propulsion, Frank's power plant was electric. Due to its light weight and increased energy output, the young inventor's vessel could travel at 20 knots, 5 times the Huntley speed, and with one crew member. Frank approached the craft with a bottle of Vin Mariana in his hand. Edward acquired the liquor, a cocoa leaf-treated Bordeaux wine, in San Pedro, Colorado, where Frank subdued the dragon of Dragon Creek. I christen you the Bull Shark, he said, and struck the hull, shattering the glass. Don't worry, Edward whispered to Bessie. I have most of a case left. From large spools, the ends of thin, miles-long tubes were attached to the top of the aquatic vehicle. One fed air from an electric man-powered pump. The other led to a microphone horn. Charlie volunteered to stay behind and monitor the pump. I don't like closed spaces much, he had told Frank. Claustrophobia, said Frank. I'm not afraid of Santa Claus, Charlie said. What are we waiting for, said Denver Doll. Let's beat the Dutch. They entered and closed the hatch. Frank started the battery-driven motor and moved the vessel into the water. Diving, he announced. Inside the submarine were padded benches and shelving, and there were provisions, including food and water. Bottles of oxygen were also stored in case the pump failed. Fans blew heat from the cabin through valves and into the water. Edward set up cameras at several windows. Solomon perched in front of one window the entire voyage. The lake itself was murky and obscure. The submarine's outside lights yielded additional visibility, although there was nothing to see except particles floating in the water. Frank pulled the microphone tube, brought it to his mouth, and blew into it twice. Charlie, he said. Frank, I hear you. Jimmy crack corn and I don't care, he sang into the microphone. Charlie, said Frank. Jimmy crack corn and I don't care. Seriously, stop. Jimmy crack corn and I don't care. My master's gone away. This is great. You know what that song means, Frank? It's pretty deep. Not now, Charlie, please. This'll just take a second. It's about a slave whose master died when the blue-tailed fly bit his horse, which threw him. There's a lot of wordplay. Jimmy crack or gimme crack means shoddy. Jimmy refers to a man or master or even a crow. Corn can mean maize, cornfield, alcohol, or even your head. So take your pick. The master split open his head and I don't care. Or the corn is rotten because no longer my problem. Or this is some terrible whiskey. Also, crows are raiding the fields and I don't care. And you know, cracker is slang for white people. Also, crack corn means to sit around and gossip. There's more. It may also refer to a masterless overseer armed with only his bullwhip. And some people sing, "Give me crack corn," like a slave's punishment meal. Finally, Jim or Jimmy means to move. But I don't know how that would fit. This microphone's great. "Are you finished?" Frank said finally. "Can we get back to work now? Goodbye." "Is that Charlie?" said P.S. "Let me talk to him." "Nobody is talking to anybody," said Frank. After some minutes of getting the feel of the vehicle, he started swimming a large grid pattern. No one saw anything. Eventually, he turned the controls over to P.S. "Let me look at my notebook," said Frank. "The large island near the center of the lake is named Poha. The smaller one is Negrete. They're volcanic islands, and eruptions created the larger one just 250 years ago. The lands were named by geologist Israel Cook Russell. His report said, and I quote, 'In the legends of the people who inhabit the region in scattered bands, there is a story about diminutive spirits having long wavy hair that are sometimes seen in the vapor wreaths ascending from hot springs. The word Poha, by which these spirits are known, is also used at times to designate hot springs in general. We may therefore name the larger island Poha Island in remembrance, perhaps, of the children of the mist that held their revels there on moonlit nights in past times. Second, in size, we call Negrete, the name being the word for blue-winged goose." Unquote. "Spooky," said P.S. "Poetic," said Edward. "Let's move toward Poha. There's not much there except some hot springs, but it will give us a new vantage point. At top speed, we should reach it in an hour." They approached the island, surfaced, and anchored the bull shark. Frank inflated a large, transparent rubber boat, and they rowed to shore. "Bessie, please make sure Solomon doesn't puncture the boat," said Frank. "You hear that?" she said to the cat. "This water you won't like." "Pfft," the cat said. After rowing ashore, the group walked inland on the 2.5-mile-long, 1.5-mile-wide island. Edward photographed the desolate landscape. "I imagine this is what the surface of the moon must be like," he said. After walking for 10 minutes, they came to a hot spring and a surprise: human bones. Although the osseous matter was not connected, it was obvious the man was lying on his back. "At first, I thought that since there's no skin at all, it's been dead at least a year," said Denver Doll. "But now I figured the birds pecked him clean long before then. He has no clothes, but I don't know he had any when he arrived. I'm thinking not. I don't see any signs of violence. Maybe the poor guy got trapped on the island. If he didn't have a boat, he sure couldn't have swum to the far shore. The closest is 10 miles away." She looked around. "Ho! What's this?" Several feet from the remains was what appeared to be a huge, deflated tube of animal skin, as if a giant snake had shed it. "Well, if that don't butter my toast," she said. "Edward, you may want to get a picture of this. Be careful. Bessie'll want to make a dress out of it." "Maybe, if it didn't stink so much," Bessie said. "I smell chartreuse," said Edward. A near fatal head injury years earlier played havoc with the photographer's senses of taste and smell. "There's nothing more here. Let's head back to the ship," said Frank. They returned to the shore and paddled the raft back to the submarine when the water exploded. A great neck suddenly broke through the surface. "Look," said P.S. "That's him." The beast undulated. The only sound was squish, squish, like nightmarish tentacles moving on rock, slimy and viscous. The eyes indeed looked dead, but the sockets appeared to be tearing. Even the neck seemed to have holes in it, and a silvery white substance leaked out. A fin tail came out and crashed down, scoring the crew. It smelled like rotting fish. "Hold on, it's trying to kill us." "Darnation," said Denver Doll. "It may look real, but I'm a-telling you, somebody's cutting shines." "That's what we're here to determine," said Frank. "Everybody, row quickly." The serpent flipped back and forth, squish, 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 squish. Into the water it flopped. A wave battered the raft. The beast moved away underwater, and the crew quickly entered the bull shark. Frank raised the anchor and compelled the boat forward. He followed a vector of water disturbances in the direction of the fog 2 miles northeast. P.S. grabbed the microphone to call Charlie. On the shore, watching the proceeds through his binoculars, the tall, blond man was worried. When he heard his tube whistle, he quickly grabbed his microphone. "Everybody okay?" said Charlie. "You're too far away to see what's happening. Was that it?" "It sure was. It attacked us. We're going after it. We're heading into the fog. Keep an eye out." Within minutes, the boat knifed at slow speed through the impenetrable gray air. The lights did little to guide them. "There's nothing on the map," said Frank. "P.S. Drive." He opened the hatch and went on top. Everything was silent. He thought he could hear a faint squish-squish. Up ahead, he imagined he viewed a shape in the water. "Slow down," he said. As they came closer, the light revealed the bow and mast of a ship. Some tatters of sails still clung like cobwebs. They passed it and continued on. Eventually, there was sound, water hitting ashore. "All stop!" They had been towing the raft, so they pulled it around and rowed out of the fog toward the island. They disembarked on a beach and secured the boat with a peg. The Eden before them bore no resemblance to Poha. A tree line stood 50 yards from the beach. Exotic birds flew overhead. Avians that should not have been living there, parrots and toucans, flamingos and quetzals. "That's more like it," said Bessie. Suddenly, from behind some large volcanic rocks, a group of dark brown-skinned men sprung. Surrounding the boarding party, rifles were cocked. One of the men, ugly, stocky, and short, and with a scarred face, came forward. "These be fine things, and if they be not sprites," he said, "then drop on you all. A southwest blew on you and blister you all over." "Now what?" said P.S. Frank spoke up. "Gentlemen, we did not mean to intrude on whatever it is you are doing. I apologize for arriving unannounced, but we have no quarrel with you. There's no need for this hostility. If you'll allow me to explain—" "Now, bind them," said the man. Frank's crew dropped their weapons and was forced to kneel. Denver Doll restrained herself, but the effort made her eye twitch. The men quickly bound them. Solomon dropped to the ground and bolted to the tree line before anyone noticed. The ugly man walked back and forth in front of their row. "What a drunken knave was the sea to cast thee in our way. O Seanith, curse your brood, spies, Saxon spies." "Now just a minute," said Denver Doll. The man walked over to Frank and slapped him. "Silence!" He noticed Bessie and walked over to her. He put a dirty hand under her chin and put his face in hers. He smiled. His teeth were gray and spotty, his beard poisonous. He spit when he talked. "Ho, hast thou not dropped from heaven? I will kiss thy feet. I prithee, be my God. I'll kiss thy foot. I'll swear myself thy subject. Together, Miranda, we would people else this isle with Calibans." "Hey, get away from her, you dad-burned rodent," said Denver Doll, straining at her bonds. "Silence," Caliban said. He turned from Bessie, walked over to Frank, and slapped him again. He refocused his attention on the cowgirl. "Ugly Algerine," said Doll. "Curist, motley-minded sow," he replied. "Almighty bad egg. Elfish marked abortive rotting hog. Border ruffian. Shallow cowardly hind. Bumming coot. Leather jerkin, crystal button, knot-pated, agitating, puke stocking, catus gartering, smooth tongue, Spanish pouch," said Caliban with satisfaction. Denver Doll took a deep breath. "Weasel kissing, devil cavorting, codfish loving, cowhide face, cheek dripping, feast dogging, gal nipping, coon sucking, grum lipped, hooter brained, honey fuggling, mud slinging, short horned, one horsed, picayune brain, cocked hat." Edward clapped his bound hands behind him. "Bah!" said Caliban as he turned away. "The most infectious pestilence upon thee." "Guess that means I win," Denver Doll said and smiled. "Does anybody know what just happened?" said Frank. "What I don't understand is," said Edward, "if she won, why are we still tied up?"